SLT Mobitel, the connection.
මෙම විශේෂ සන්ලයිට් නිෂ්පාදන මිලදීගෙන ශ්‍රී ලාංකේය මනුදම්වියමන අපි සවිමත් කරමු. සන්ලයිට් කෙයා.
Tonight, no issues. Health officials say hospital beds and oxygen not a problem and hint that mixing and matching vaccines could be on the cards. Without warning, Army commander says no plans for a countrywide lockdown, but sudden isolation of high-risk areas possible. 4 million jabs, a sum of $80.5 million approved by the World Bank to purchase vaccines for 18% of the population. In absentia, High Court trial at bar decides to proceed with bond scam case despite absence of 2 accused. All this and much more coming up on this Thursday, the 29th of April 2021.
ඇල්කොහොල් අඩංගු hand sanitizer භාවිත කරන්න. ලෙඩ රෝග ඇති කරන විෂ බීජවලට එරෙහිව සටන් කරන්න. හඳුන්වා දීමේ මිල රුපියල් 350යි.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9. I am Shanella Fernando. In your top stories for tonight, Deputy Director General of Public Health Services Dr. Mahendra Arnold today reassured the public that the health system has sufficient beds and oxygen supplies to cope with the current case load. However, he warned that the situation could change due to an exponential rise in cases, which would deplete resources and turn into a major crisis. Meanwhile, commenting on the administration of the second vaccine doses in the midst of reports of low supplies, Chief Epidemiologist Dr. Sudat Samaravira said that positive results of vaccine mix and match studies will be taken into consideration by the government as a possible solution.
Sri Lanka reported its highest daily COVID-19 cases yesterday, with the epidemiology unit confirming 1,466 infections in the country. Of yesterday's cases, the Colombo district topped the list with 228 infections, while the Gampara district recorded 209 cases. The Kurunegala, Kalutara and Matale districts recorded 172, 133 and 119 infections respectively. Meanwhile, 86 cases of the virus were reported from Kandy, 58 from Monaragala and 49 from Kegol. 47 COVID-19 infections each were reported from Trincomalee and Badula districts. In addition, 303 coronavirus infections were also reported across 13 other districts, along with 15 imported cases yesterday. So far today, 1,531 new COVID-19 cases have been confirmed. In the meantime, Deputy Director General of Public Health Services Dr. Mahendra Arnold sought to dispel rumours that the country has inadequate hospital beds and oxygen supplies to cope with its caseload.
කොවිඩ් සඳහා රෝග සත්කාර ඒකක 82ක් තියෙනවා. ඇඳන් 12789ක් අද වෙනකොට තියෙනවා. එයින් ඇඳන් 9592ක් රෝගීන් සිටිනවා. ඒට අමතරව දැඩි සත්කාර ඒකක 15ක් තියෙනවා. එහි ඇඳන් 146ක් තියෙනවා. දැනට අපේ තියෙන ඇඳන් රෝහල් ICU beds ඔක්සිජන් ඒ සියල්ලම ප්‍රමාණවත් දැනට තියෙන රෝගීන් සංඛ්‍යාව අපිට සත්කාර සේවා ලබා ගන්න. නමුත් ඉදිරියේදී විශාල වශයෙන් වැඩි වුණොත් අපිට විශාල අර්බුදකාරී තත්යකට මුහුණ දෙන්න වෙනවා. අන්න ඒකයි අපේ මහජනතාව දැනගන්න ඕනේ. අපි ඒ තත්ත්වෙට යන්නේක තමයි වළක්වන්න ඕනේ.
In other developments, speaking at a media briefing today, Deputy Director General of Laboratories Dr. Sudha Dharmaratne announced that the country has carried out a record of 23,730 PCR tests yesterday. This brings the total since March 2020 to over 2.7 million PCR tests carried out so far. However, President of the PHI's union Upul Rohanam claims that officials in certain districts have been given orders to stop conducting random PCR tests. He says that in such a situation, discontinuing random PCR tests could worsen the situation and urged authorities to inform the public if there is a lack of testing resources. In the meantime, Chief Epidemiologist Dr. Sudat Samaravira says that based on results of research into mixing and matching vaccines, Sri Lanka too could look at such a process in the future.
ලෝක සෞඛ්‍ය සංවිධානය විසින් නිර්දේශ කරලා තියෙනවා මොකද කරන්න ඕනේ කියලා. ඒකෙදි කියන්නේ මේ එන්නත සති 4ත් සති 12ත් අතරදී දෙවනි මාත්‍රාව ලබා දීම තමයි වඩාත්ම සුදුසු. යම්කිසි කෙනෙකුට සති 12න් ලැබුණේ නැත්නම් ඒ එන්නත ලැබුණු වහාම ඒ ලබා දීමට කටයුතු කරන්න. එතකොට එයාගේ ප්‍රතිශක්තිය නැවතත් ස්ථාපිත වෙනවයි කියලා. එතකොට ඒ වගේ තත්ත්වයක් යම්කිසි කෙනෙකුට ඒ එන්නතේ දෙවනි මාත්‍රාව ලැබෙන්නේ නැති වුණොත් එතකොට ගැටලුවක් එනවා. එතකොට ඊළඟ දේ තමයි මේ අවස්ථාවේදී පරීක්ෂණ සිදු වෙනවා mix and match vaccines. ඒ කියන්නේ vaccine වර්ග දෙකක් එක මාත්‍රාවක් එකකින් දීලා අනිත් මාත්‍රාව තවත් එකකින් දීම පිළිබඳ. එතකොට ඒ වගේ වෙන පරීක්ෂණ වලින් අපිට සමහර විට සාධකයක් ආවොත් මේ අයට වෙනත් එන්නතක් දෙන්න පුළුවන් කියලා ඒ එන්නත අපේ කටට ලබා ගැනීමේ හැකියාවක් තියෙනවා නම් එහෙම වුණොත් අපිට ඒක දෙවන මාත්‍රාව විදිහට දෙන්න පුළුවන් වේවි. එහෙම නැත්නම් පළවෙනි මාත්‍රාව අමතක කරලා මාත්‍රා දෙකක් දීම හරි අපිට සිදු කරන්න පුළුවන් වේවි. ඒවා ඉදිරියේ තවමත් මේ තියෙන පරීක්ෂණ මට්ටම් වල මේ වෙලාවේ අපි කරන්නේ worst scenario එක. නරකම තත්ත්වය આવොත් මොකද්ද කරන්න කියලා ඒ worst scenario එක පිළිබඳව assessment එකක් කරගෙන ඒ තත්ත්වය තුලින් අපි කටයුතු කරන එක. එතකොට එතෙන්දී අපිට අවශ්‍ය වෙන ඇඳම් ප්‍රමාණය කොච්චරද? කොච්චර පරීක්ෂණ කටයුතු කොච්චර කරන්න ඕනද? ඊට පස්සේ අවශ්‍ය ඖෂධ සහ අනිත් ප්‍රතිකාර කොච්චර ඕනද? ඒ පිළිබඳව ඇසස්මන්ට් එකක් කරගෙන ඒ පිළිබඳව යම්කිසි විදියකින් ඇස්තමේන්තුවක් කරලා ඒ தත්ත්වයට සූදානම් වීම සඳහා සහ ඒ தත්ත්වයට සූදානම් වීමේදී මොන පියවරයන් වලදීද පළවෙනි පියවර මොකද්ද දෙවෙනි පියවර මොකද්ද කියන එක පිළිබඳව කරලා තමයි ඒක කරන්නේ. ඒ සමස්තය සෞඛ්‍ය අමාත්‍යාංශය විසින් සිදු කරනවා.
He also warned that the people working in air-conditioned environments with no ventilation are at a higher risk of contracting the virus.
අපේ රටේ සෑම දිස්ත්‍රික්කයකම ආසාදිතයින් ඉන්න බව පැහැදිලි වෙනවා. මේ නිසා සියලුම දෙනා තමුන්ගේ රාජකාරී කටයුතු කරනකොට ඉතාමත්ම ප්‍රවේශම් වෙන්න ඕන. යම්කිසි විදියකින් කෙනෙක් ජනෙල් දොරවල් වහලා තියෙන කාමරයක කුඩා කාමරයක ඉන්නවා නම් විශේෂයෙන්ම වායු සමීකරණය කරලා තියෙන කාමරවල විදියට ජනෙල් දොරවල් අරලා තියන්නේ නැහැ. ඒ වගේ තැනකදී මේ රෝගය තවත් කෙනෙකුට ව්‍යාප්ත වෙන්න වැළඳෙන්න තියෙන හැකියාව වැඩි. ඒ නිසා ඒ වගේ ස්ථානවල අපි නිර්දේශ කරනවා පුළුවන් හැම අවස්ථාවකම ජනෙල් දොරකවල් විවෘතව තබන්න.
In the meantime, 362 patients recovered from the novel coronavirus today, raising the total tally of recoveries to 95,445. As such, the total number of active COVID-19 cases currently stand at 10,378.
Follow me into the jungle.
අමුතු කේක් එක තියාරා.
කියලා හැදෙවෝ වගේ.
Director General of Health Services Dr. Asela Gunawardena announced that all religious congregational activities will be prohibited until further notice. The number of devotees that are allowed to gather in a religious site from now on has been limited to 25. In the meantime, after ruling out any countrywide lockdowns, Chief of the National Operations Centre for Prevention of COVID-19, Army Commander General Shavendra Silva announced that high-risk areas, however, will be locked down with no advance notice.
The Chief of the National Operations Centre for Prevention of COVID-19, Army Commander General Shavendra Silva announced that several areas in the Trincomalee district have been placed in isolation in a bid to contain the spread of the virus. Accordingly, the Gramaniladari divisions of Sumedangapura, Mudovi, Koviladi, Linganagar, Kavatikuda and China Bay were isolated at 7 a.m. today. The Army Commander also outlined new measures that will be put in place to contain the virus. Speaking on a program on AdaDerana, he revealed that areas at a high level of risk will be isolated with immediate effect without advance notice. However, he ruled out the possibility of countrywide lockdowns at this point. Meanwhile, police operations are continuing to nab people who violate and disregard government-imposed quarantine laws.
Within a period of last 24 hours, 187 persons have been arrested in connection with the offences of face mask and social distancing. Within a period of last 4 days, 617 suspects have been arrested. Sri Lanka police are continuing quarantine operations across the country in order to apprehend the lawbreakers. Special police teams have been deployed in order to monitor the situation.
Another operation conducted by the police has so far detected over 1,000 three-wheeler drivers found in violation of quarantine orders.
1,240 three-wheelers had violated quarantine rules and regulations while they were transporting passengers, especially in the rear seat. The excessive passengers had been transported. In addition to that, according to the instruction, there should be a cover between the front seat, the driver's seat, and the rear seat. But the police have detected 3,073 three-wheelers. They have not followed the instructions issued by the authorities. In addition to that, 2,982 three-wheelers have been found without any sanitizer equipment or liquid. The drivers of the three-wheelers have been warned, but in the future, police are going to strictly implement the quarantine law against them.
In other news, a special operation commenced at 12 Western Province entry and exit points at noon today to monitor and detect quarantine law violators. With that, police media spokesperson DIG AdaDerana announced that random rapid antigen tests will be conducted by health officials at these points until further notice.
These places are Topua Bridge in Kochikade, Badalgama Bridge Kotadeniava, Halagala Junction Nittambuwa, Giriulla Bridge Mirigama, Samanabad Bridge Dompe, Wahagoda Bridge Hangwalla, Bentara Bridge Aludgama, Tiniavala Junction, Katakadal Bridge Ingiriya, and Samandevala Point Baduralia, Avittava Bridge Migahatanna, and the exchange of Valipanna of Southern Highway. Randomly rapid antigen test would be conducted at the entrance and exit points of Western Province in order to prevent spreading COVID-19 to other areas and into Western Province. So therefore, your support and cooperation is highly solicited in this regard.
Meanwhile, in other news, the Foreign Ministry has limited consular services due to the prevailing COVID-19 situation in the country. Issuing a media communique, the ministry says that the services provided by the Consular Affairs Division will be prioritized to those who are in urgent need in the coming weeks. It also says that consular services, except in cases of deaths of Sri Lankans overseas and attestation of export documents and other related certificates, will be done strictly by appointment only. What's more, the ministry requests the public to contact the Consular Affairs Division on its hotlines to make appointments. Further, the public can also email consular@mfa.gov.lk for appointments as well. In the meantime, Director General of Health Services Dr. Asela Gunawardena announced today that all religious congregational activities will be prohibited until further notice. Issuing a statement, Dr. Asela Gunawardena also announced that the maximum number of persons allowed to gather at any religious site must be limited to 25. Meanwhile, earlier this morning, the Department of Muslim Religious and Cultural Affairs announced that the Waqf Board has decided to temporarily suspend Taraweeh, Jummah prayers and congregational activities at all mosques until further notice. Issuing a circular, the department also said that only a maximum of 25 persons will be permitted to participate in 5-time-a-day Jamaat prayers at any given time in strict adherence to health and safety protocols. It also says that mosques located in isolated areas should not open their doors to the public.
Sri Lanka is set to receive a boost to its vaccine war chest after the World Bank approved an $80.5 million additional financing facility which will fund vaccinations for 80% of Sri Lanka's population. World Bank Country Director for Maldives, Nepal and Sri Lanka, Faris Hadadzervo, stated in a communique released on the approval that Sri Lanka has demonstrated resilience in the implementation of its test, trace and treat strategy that has relied on its well-established public healthcare system.
The World Bank has approved $80.5 million in additional financing to help Sri Lanka access and distribute COVID-19 vaccines and to strengthen the country's vaccination system and pandemic response. A press release issued by the World Bank stated that this additional finance builds on the $217.56 million Sri Lanka COVID-19 Emergency Response and Pandemic Preparedness Project, which was approved in April 2020. The new financing is expected to help purchase vaccines to cover approximately 4 million people, or 18% of the population. It will also cover costs of deploying safe and effective vaccines to 20% of the population in order to help implement the National Vaccine Deployment Plan of the Ministry of Health. World Bank Country Director for Maldives, Nepal and Sri Lanka, Faris Hadadzervo, stated in the communique that Sri Lanka has demonstrated resilience in the implementation of its test, trace and treat strategy relying on its well-established public healthcare system. He added that Sri Lanka needs to build on its strong past experiences to implement vaccination programs and strengthen pandemic preparedness to project its population in order to recover from the impact of the pandemic. In addition to financing, the bank is providing technical assistance and knowledge-sharing workshops for countries in South Asia on different aspects of designing and deploying fair and equitable vaccine strategies.
Sri Lanka and China vowed to enhance a pragmatic cooperation in all sectors between the two countries, including between the countries' militaries. The pledge was made in an official media release issued by visiting Chinese Defense Minister General Wei Fenghe following his departure this morning. Yesterday, General Wei met with and held discussions with President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa. Chinese Defense Minister General Wei Fenghe left Sri Lanka this morning, ending his two-day official visit. The Chinese delegation of 37 high-ranking officials led by General Fenghe departed for Beijing at 8:55 a.m. today aboard a special Chinese Air Force flight. An official statement on General Wei's visit to Sri Lanka released at the end of this visit appreciated Sri Lanka's readiness to strengthen exchanges and pragmatic cooperation in various fields including defence and to grow bilateral ties further. The statement added that the two countries are jointly working on the high-quality construction of the Belt and Road, pointing out that the two countries share bright prospects for development. China also appreciated Sri Lanka's position on issues relating to Taiwan, Hong Kong and Xinjiang and assured its support for Sri Lanka's stance on issues relating to human rights and national reconciliation. The statement goes on to say that certain major countries are keen to form cliques and factions and seek regional hegemony, which goes against the people's shared aspirations and severely harms the interest of regional countries. China continued to appreciate Sri Lanka's independent and non-aligned policy and promised to continue joint efforts to strengthen coordination and safeguard regional peace and tranquility. The Colombo High Court has decided to proceed with the hearing of the bond scam misappropriation case, despite the absence of former Central Bank Governor Arjun Mahindran and ex-Perpetual Treasuries Director Arjun Punchiheva. This was in response to a request by the Attorney General's Department, who also noted that the Attorney General has to date made clarifications to the Attorney General of Singapore on the extradition request of the former Central Bank Governor on 3 occasions already.
The Colombo High Court trial at bar hearing the 2016 bond scam case has decided to proceed with the case despite the absence of 2 accused, former Central Bank Governor Arjuna Mahindran and former Perpetual Treasuries Director Ajahn Gadia Punchiheva. The trial at bar consisting of judges Amal Ranaraja, Namal Balale and Aditya Patamanige are hearing the case on the criminal misappropriation of 15 billion rupees through a treasury bond auction held between the 29th and 31st of March 2016. Representing the Attorney General's Department, Senior State Counsel Lakshmini Girihagama pointed out in court today that the duo named as the 3rd and 9th accused in the case are currently avoiding custody after having fled to foreign countries. On this basis, the Senior State Counsel sought the permission of the bench to proceed with the case despite the duo's absence under the provisions of Article 458 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. In March this year, the Attorney General submitted a 3rd set of clarifications to the Attorney General of Singapore on the extradition request of the former Central Bank Governor. Further, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has also forwarded the extradition request to the Sri Lankan High Commission in Singapore in September 2019, which was subsequently forwarded to the Government of Singapore for action. According to an Interpol alert last year, Arjuna Mahindran has since changed his name to Harjan Alexander.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa says that he is ready as the head of state to meet with and reassure the country's farmers that banning chemical fertilizers, pesticides and weedicides will not necessarily impact harvests. Addressing a meeting to discuss the ban, the president stated that he would like to see Sri Lanka the first country in the world to ban such chemicals from its agricultural sector.
A meeting to discuss a possible ban on chemical fertilizers, pesticides and weedicides was worked off this morning, chaired by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa.
මේ රසායනික පෝර කෘමිනාශක හා වල්නාශක භාවිතය තහනම් කිරීම කරනකොට අපිට අස්වැන්න අඩු වෙන්නේ නැතුව ඒ අස්වැනි ප්‍රමාණය තියාගන්නට පුළුවන්. ගොවියාට කිසිසේත්ම ආදායම අඩු නොවන අන්දමට අපි වග බලා ගන්නවා කියන එක. මේවා අපි අමාරු වුණත් කරන්නට ඕන දේවල්. මම ස්ථිර තීරණයක් අරගෙන තියෙනවා අපි මේක කොහොම හරි කරනවා කියන එක. සම්පූර්ණයෙන්ම මේවා අහක් කරපු පළවෙනි රට කියලා අපිට කියන්නට පුළුවන් නම් ඒකත් අපිට ලොකු දෙයක්. ජනාධිපතිවරයාගෙන් මේක වෙන්න ඕන කියලා ඕනම දෙයක් කරන්න ගොවින්ට ගිහිල්ලා මේක කියලා දෙන්න වුණත් මම ලෑස්ති. අපි ඒ කාර්යය කරමු.
The first batch of Sri Lankans to be released from the Tarheel deportation camp in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, are set to return to the island tomorrow. The repatriation process of Sri Lankan inmates at the deportation camp is a result of ongoing collaboration between the Saudi authorities and the Sri Lankan embassy in Riyadh. 154 Sri Lankans from the deportation camps have been facilitated by the embassy to return home. Accordingly, a second and third group of Sri Lankans are scheduled to return to the island on the 3rd and 5th of next month. The repatriations come in the backdrop of several appeals made to the government to take immediate action to rescue Sri Lankan migrants workers being held under inhumane conditions at Saudi deportation centres. We'll return after this short commercial break. Don't go away. Welcome back in more news. Sri Lanka surpassed $1 billion in exports in March 2021 after a lapse of 6 months. According to customs statistics, earnings from merchandise exports recorded double-digit growth of 62.47% in March 2021 year-on-year, with the figure reaching $1.6 billion. Earnings from merchandise exports also increased by 11.51% in the first quarter of 2021 to $2.9 million compared to the previous year. Earnings from the export of major product sectors such as apparel, tea, rubber-based products, coconut-based products, spices and electrical and electronic components too increased, both in the month of March 2021 and during the first quarter of 2021 compared to the previous year. Meanwhile, export earnings from spices and essential oils in March 2021 increased significantly compared to March 2020, with a growth mainly attributed to increased exports of cinnamon, pepper and cloves. Both export earnings and volume of tea increased year-on-year in March 2021 by 99.33% and 86.69% respectively. Export earnings from rubber and rubber finished products increased by 80.45% year-on-year, $35 million in March 2021. The oil share price index fell to 7,216.70 following a drop of 23.24 points, while the S&P SL 20 index of more liquid stocks also fell by 16.48 points to end at 2,862.32. Market turnover was 2.5 billion rupees. Now here's Dimantha Matthew with your daily report on your market performance.
At the start of the day, the market rose sharply during the first few minutes of trading. However, that uptrend was short-lived and we saw a bit of a zigzag pattern where we saw a sharp dip afterwards and then a bit of an uptrend. But then overall, from that point onwards, the market was in negative territory throughout the day. Now today, we are seeing a red market, but the turnover levels are quite healthy. We are seeing 2.5 billion turnover levels. In addition to that, we saw again the retail favorite counters dominating the turnover list. So out of those, also the dollar income companies are at the top of the list.
The rupee ended at 199 rupees and 87 cents against the US dollar today, after closing at 199 rupees and 52 cents yesterday. Let's now take a look at how the rupee traded against other major currencies during the day. In sports news, Sri Lankan-born show jumper Matilda Carlson has become the first Sri Lankan athlete to qualify for the Tokyo Olympics this year. Although having grown up in Sweden, Carlson, however, decided to compete for her country of birth, Sri Lanka. Carlson is not only the first qualifier for the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games from Sri Lanka, but is the first equestrian for Sri Lanka in an Olympic event. In February last year, it was announced that Matilda Carlson lost her Olympic qualification as the International Equestrian body decided to cancel the all ranking points of certain competitions organized at the end of 2019. With that, we wrap up tonight's edition of First at 9. Thank you for joining. I'm Shanella Fernando. Have a good night.